Bernie Sanders, despite being an outspoken critic of Benjamin Netanyahu and his Israeli government for almost the past 2 years, calling what they're doing ethnic cleansing, war crimes, crimes against humanity, despite all of that, he has still been heavily criticized from his left and from people in the pro-Palestine movement more broadly for not using the word genocide. And I didn't think that that was a particularly useful way of dispersing your energy if you're someone who's a part of that movement, because someone who's nominally on your side, although he may not be exactly where we want him to be on that issue, if you look at the entirety of American politicians in the Senate and Congress, he's one of the 3 or 4 best on the issue. And I think spending a lot of energy going after him for not being exactly where you want him instead of going after the other 500 or so politicians who are either silent on the issue or staunchly pro-Israel is just doing the politics the wrong way. But although I felt it was a waste of energy, I did also think it was weird that Bernie would call it these other things: crimes against humanity, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, starvation, famine. He would go that far, but for some reason, the word genocide, he just wasn't ready to go there. I don't want to speculate on why. There's lots of things it could be. I don't know the man personally, but I will say it is good to see him come out now with this article he has written on his sanders.senate.gov website, where he says it is genocide. So he's finally on the same page as a lot of us have been for quite some time now. And I'm not someone who thinks it's productive or useful to be like, we told you so, or complain about why weren't you saying this earlier. I think that if you want to be part of a political coalition that is going to be able to achieve some of its goals, some of its aims, you have to be able to welcome people in when they come to your side instead of being like, you should have been on our side a year ago. I told you so. That's not useful. That's not helpful. That's not a pragmatic or successful or good way of practicing politics. Anybody who's going to be reacting like that to this, I can empathize with where you're coming from, but you're doing things wrong. But anyways, it is good to see Bernie finally come to this position, finally call it a genocide. Let's go through what he's written here in this op-ed. He starts the article off by saying Hamas, a terrorist organization, began this war with its brutal attack on October 7th, 2023, which killed 1,200 innocent people and took 250 hostages. Israel, as any other country, had a right to defend itself from Hamas. Now, personally, this is what I have a problem with, starting this op-ed where he's saying that Israel is committing a genocide, starting it off with this bit about Hamas. This is exactly the type of rhetoric that I hate, when people finally come to the position that Israel is committing a genocide or Israel is doing horrible things, when they have to soften the blow by first criticizing Hamas. I think it's a little cowardly, frankly. I think it's unnecessary. I think that you're obviously just afraid of the backlash of people calling you anti-Semitic or any of that stuff. Because yes, it is true that the American establishment, the media, corporations, there's a very strong pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist hold. And we've seen this with people being fired for their pro-Palestine stances. You've had students being deported for pro-Palestine opinions. It's definitely a scary political landscape, but someone like Bernie Sanders doesn't really have to worry about that stuff anyways. He doesn't take big money. He doesn't have to worry about being deported. And I guess this is more an ideological thing for him. But I think anybody who has a lot of familiarity about the history of this region, to say that Hamas started this war, let's be real. This war has been going on for way longer than October 7th, and it's not really a war. It's one side engaging in a really oppressive occupation and apartheid, and it's been that way for decades. I mean, the founding of Israel as a colonial state in the 40s, even going back to the Balfour Declaration, if you understand the history of this region, to say that Hamas began this war, it's not even a war. It's Israel waging a siege and total destruction of Gaza. So, I'm not going to criticize Bernie for coming to the position of it being genocide too late. For that, I welcome him. But for this specific introduction to this op-ed, I do think that just leave this part out entirely, all right? You don't have to say you support Hamas, okay? That's not at all what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is to kind of frame this as this being a war that was started by Hamas, just kind of totally ignoring the rest of the history in the region. I just think it's inaccurate and a little irresponsible and doesn't give people who are less educated the full picture on what is happening here. But to his credit, everything else in this op-ed is well written and is a much more accurate reflection of the situation. But over the last 2 years, Israel has not simply defended itself against Hamas. Instead, it has waged an all-out war against the entire Palestinian people. Many legal experts have now concluded that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. The International Association of Genocide Scholars concluded that Israel's politics and actions in Gaza meet the legal definition of genocide. The Israeli human rights group, B'Tselem, and Physicians for Human Rights Israel have reached the same conclusion, as have international groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Just yesterday, an independent commission of experts appointed by the United Nations echoed this finding. These experts concluded that it is clear that there is an intent to destroy the Palestinians in Gaza through acts that meet the criteria set forth in the Genocide Convention. I agree. Now, although, again, everything he just wrote there, that I all fully agree with, that's well written, it does make me once again wonder why it took him so long to call it a genocide, because everything he just referenced, except the independent commission, like the human rights organizations, B'Tselem, the Physicians for Human Rights Israel, Association of Genocide Scholars, those groups have been out for at least weeks, some of them, many of them months, saying this is a genocide, so that's not new. The only new thing that he's acting on is that United Nations Commission. Maybe just the way he grew up was in a different era where there was a different framing on the conflict, and maybe he was caught up in more of like a Zionist framework where, you know, he's thinking of it in the lens of the Holocaust, of it being a safe place for the Jewish people, not really seeing it as the colonial project that someone like myself sees it as. Maybe for Bernie, it was a lot harder for him just to accept that it is a genocide, despite even the fact he was calling it ethnic cleansing, war crimes, etc. Maybe the term genocide was hard for him to personally come to terms with, and then the United Nations Commission just tipped the scale too far to where he couldn't deny it anymore. I don't know, again, it's a little weird to me, but at least he's here now. Out of a population of 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza, Israel has now killed some 65,000 people and wounded roughly 164,000. The full toll is likely much higher, with many thousands of bodies buried under the rubble. A leaked classified Israeli military database indicates that 83% of those killed have been civilians. More than 18,000 children have been killed, including 12,000 aged 12 or younger. I appreciate hearing him mentioning the full toll is likely much higher because, like he says, there's thousands of bodies buried under the rubble. The death toll that we hear is only the documented deaths, but in any conflict, especially a total destruction of an area like this, the death toll is going to be way higher than what we hear at first. We probably won't know for years what the actual rough estimate of the death toll is. Personally, I think that it's very easy to believe that it's in the hundreds of thousands, or at least over 100,000, if not multiple 100,000 at this point. And trust me, I don't want to be right about that, but just objectively looking at the situation, I fear that that's where we are. He goes on to say, for almost 2 years, the extremist Netanyahu government has severely limited the amount of humanitarian aid allowed into Gaza and thrown up every possible hurdle to the United Nations and other aid groups trying to provide life-saving supplies. This includes an 11-week total blockade in which Israel did not permit any food, water, fuel, or medical supplies to enter Gaza. As a direct result of these Israeli policies, Gaza is now gripped by man-made famine, with hundreds of thousands of people facing starvation. More than 400 people, including 145 children, have already starved to death. Each day brings new deaths from hunger. But it is not just the human cost. Israel has systematically destroyed Gaza's physical infrastructure. Satellite imagery shows that the Israeli bombardment has destroyed 70% of all structures in Gaza. We've all seen those pictures, the before and after, and even just without the before picture, you just see, when you see pictures of Gaza now, a place that is totally flattened, it's just all rubble. It's really horrifying to see, frankly. The UN estimates that 92% of housing units have been damaged or destroyed. At this very moment, Israel is demolishing what's left of Gaza City. Most hospitals have been destroyed, and almost 1,600 healthcare workers have been killed. Almost 90% of water and sanitation facilities are now inoperable. Hundreds of schools have been bombed. as has every single one of Gaza's 12 universities. There has been no electricity for 23 months. And that is just what we know from aid workers and local journalists, hundreds of whom have been killed as Israel bars outside media from Gaza. That's a critical point there as well. Part of the reason we can't know the full extent of the devastation and destruction is because of how Israel has had a total media blackout. They won't let anybody from outside of Palestine who, they've been documenting their own genocide, frankly. They won't let any outside media in to really do a full assessment of the situation. And of course, they cast doubt on anything the Palestinians say out of, both racism and also just in their own self-interest. In fact, Israel has killed more journalists in Gaza than have been killed in any previous conflict. That's a crazy stat, but it's true. It's been true for a long time now. The result, there is likely much we don't know about the scale of the atrocities. Again, spot on with that. That's why I had to criticize him for the Hamas thing at the start, but I don't want you to think that that's me totally criticizing this piece, because besides that Hamas bit at the beginning, the rest of this is actually a really good op-ed kind of describing what's going on. And although someone like myself, this isn't new what I'm reading, I know that Bernie is a very influential figure, even to many people outside of the left-wing sphere. He connects with independents and even some Republicans in a way that other Democrats, other left-wing people just don't. It's one of the reasons why I think he's such an important political figure. But yeah, so I think this is an important piece nonetheless, even if that first little paragraph, I think, was not necessary, shouldn't have been included, and kind of, again, misframes the situation as being started by Hamas when the real situation has been going on for decades and needs to be contextualized in that light. But everything else, again, that he says here, he's writing a really strong piece. Now, with the Trump administration's full support, the extremist Netanyahu government is openly pursuing a policy of ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the West Bank. Having made life unlivable through bombing and starvation, they are pushing for voluntary migration of Palestinians to neighboring countries to make way for President Trump's twisted vision of a Riviera in the Middle East. He's referencing, of course, the American plan to, after the Israelis ethnically cleanse Gaza, to, build Trump towers and casinos and hotels and luxury lifestyle stuff, because these insane capitalist freaks do not care about human life. They just care about money and luxury. Genocide is defined as actions taken with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The actions include killing members of the group or deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. The legal question hinges on intent. Now, the next paragraph I think is one of the best in the piece, because this is really what makes the strong point of it being a genocide and really showing you that there is, without a shadow of a doubt, intent to do this. And again, folks like myself have been screaming this for months, for over a year now, for almost 2 years, about the fact that members of the Israeli government, in their own words, have been saying their intent to kill all the Palestinians, cleanse Gaza of all the Palestinians, how they're all guilty, they're all animals, they all deserve to die. They've said that in their own words. That's not shit we're making up. And that right there, like he said, the legal question hinges on intent. Well, the quotes he's about to provide us, which are real quotes, and again, I've been aware of these for a while, maybe you haven't been, you can go look into them. These are all very real quotes from Israeli leaders and officials. And so that's why I think this is such an important paragraph in this piece, because it really breaks down the fact that, there is obviously deliberate intent to inflict on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So he says, Israeli leaders have made their intent clear. Early in the conflict, the defense minister said, "We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly." The finance minister vowed that Gaza will be entirely destroyed. Another minister declared all Gaza will be Jewish. "We are wiping out this evil." Israeli President Herzog said, "It is an entire nation out there that is responsible." Another minister called for erasing all of Gaza from the face of the earth. Another Israeli lawmaker said the Gaza Strip should be flattened and there should be one sentence for everyone there: death. Do you see how depraved and obvious what they want to do is? We have to wipe the Gaza Strip off the map. There are no innocents there. Yet another Knesset member, the Knesset is kind of like the Israeli parliament, another Knesset member called for erasing all of Gaza from the face of the earth. And just recently, a minister in Israel's high-level security cabinet said, Gaza City itself should be exactly like Rafah, which we turned into a city of ruins. So the intent is clear, the conclusion is inescapable. Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Bernie goes on to say that he recognizes that many people may disagree with this conclusion. The truth is, whether you call it genocide or ethnic cleansing or mass atrocities or war crimes, the path forward is clear. We as Americans, and I'll add here, we as humans must end our complicity in the slaughter of the Palestinian people. That is why I have worked with a number of my Senate colleagues to force votes on 7 joint resolutions of disapproval to stop offensive arms sales to Israel. The United States must not continue sending many billions of dollars in weapons to Netanyahu's genocidal government. Having named it a genocide, we must use every ounce of our leverage to demand an immediate ceasefire, a massive surge of humanitarian aid facilitated by the UN, and initial steps to provide Palestinians with a state of their own. And I think this is an important point as well, because this is why people like myself argue that it is important to call it a genocide. Crystal Ball made the argument very well on her show Breaking Points. By naming it a genocide, you make it so that there's a moral imperative to act. I mean, obviously war crimes are bad, ethnic cleansing is bad, and both those also, scream urgency, scream we need to do something about this. But genocide, there's just something really potent about that word, given its historic context emerging after the Holocaust, being applied to such situations like the Rwandan genocide. There is just a clear historical precedent that genocide is something unequivocally, humanly, barbaric, horrific, unacceptable. There is no caveats, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. When something is a genocide, the entire international community has a moral imperative, has a responsibility to act, to do whatever they can to prevent it. And so that's why it's so important. Some people are like, oh, who cares if you call it a genocide, if you call out the Israeli government? But that's why, that's the point Crystal made, and that's the point I fully agree with, that calling it a genocide adds a moral imperative that all of us must use, like Bernie says, every ounce of our leverage to demand an immediate ceasefire and to pretty much stop what is going on. He closes the article by saying, but this issue goes beyond Israel and Palestine. Around the world, democracy is on the defensive. Hatred, racism, and divisiveness are on the rise. The challenge we now face is to prevent the world from descending into barbarism, where horrific crimes against humanity can take place with impunity. We must say now and forever that while wars may happen, there are certain basic standards that must be upheld. The starvation of children cannot be tolerated. The flattening of cities must not become the norm. Collective punishment is beyond the pale. The very term genocide is a reminder of what can happen if we fail. That word emerged from the Holocaust, the murder of 6 million Jews, one of the darkest chapters in human history. Make no mistake, if there is no accountability for Netanyahu and his fellow war criminals, other demagogues will do the same. History demands that the world act with one voice to say enough is enough, no more genocide. And to that I say, well said, Bernie. 99% of this op-ed, again, besides that, kind of, in my opinion, unnecessary part about Hamas at the beginning, which ignores the historical context. But the rest of this article, I think, is very well written. I think makes a very strong case for why we all should care about what's happening in Gaza. Obviously, there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of outspoken activists and people who have been leading on this for a long time. They all deserve their credit as well. But I think us on the pro-Palestinian side, people on, I would call us the pro-human side, because it's not like, at least in my situation, I don't want to see all Israeli citizens die either. That's not the point. The point is, I don't want any death. I don't want any destruction. I want responsibility. I want people like Netanyahu and other people in his government, I want them to face repercussions for their actions and spend the rest of their lives in jail. But I'm not looking for a war of retribution. I'm not looking for Israelis to suffer. I'm looking for suffering to end everywhere, and for people responsible for suffering to face legal repercussions. But yeah, anyways, what Bernie is saying here just represents another strong voice that we now have on our pro-Palestinian, pro-human side, to say, this is a genocide, enough is enough. What are we doing here? This needs to stop.